Hi, we're going to start on page 95. So, there, under the tree, she saw Wishcob's daughters, Little Bee and Twilight, and her cousins, including Tata, a thin and quiet boy, just a little younger than Amakias. He was the son of her mother's brother, Akawenazi. As soon as Amakias saw Tata, an itchy, joking mood always came upon her, and she looked around to see what tricks she could play on her quiet cousin. His older brothers were rough and ran wild, and he had a sister known as a strong, swift runner. Her name was Two Strike Girl, and she was better than most boys at hunting and fighting. She had to be forced to do the things girls normally did, and her mother and grandma had finally given up on her. I'm dancing the rice this year, Two Strike Girl told Amakias right off. That was most often the boy's job, but she had persuaded the rice chief she could do it. Early the next morning, the rice boss blessed the harvest, and Mamma set out with Auntie Muskrat, who pulled and back while Mamma used her rice sticks to bend the stalks towards her and knock the rice grains off into the bottom of the boat. That year, although the harvest was not the best, there was rice for everyone, and as always, work that could not be avoided. Omakias grumbled when Grandma asked her to go pick reeds. Take Two Strike Girl with you, she ordered. Pick enough for 2 mats. So Amakias and her cousin went to the side of the slough where the flattest reeds grew, and used their knives to slice them off below the waterline, bunch after bunch, until they had great bundles that they carried back to camp on their shoulders. Here, said Two Strike Girl, dumping hers off. She gathered herself to spring away, but Grandma caught her. Stay, ordered Grandma. Help your cousin weave. Two Strike Girl looked alarmed and then horrified at the idea of doing girls' work. Still, because she was ordered to do it by Grandma, she sat down beside Omakias and began to weave the reeds into strong, simple mats that they could use to smoke the rice. Even now, the great fire Mamma had prepared was burning down to its embers, and as the girl's fingers moved unwillingly, Pinch was just as unwillingly gathering up rotten old pieces of maple wood to use in smoking the rice. When he had gathered several sagging piles of the crumbly maple wood, and when the mats were finished, Omakias is regular and straight in its weave, and Two Strike Girl's crooked and gaping, Mamma took the mats and set them off over the smoking maple fire. Then, on top of the mats, she poured the rice, which began, after the mat was properly heated, to give off a most delicate, nutty aroma. Using a rake made from a stick of red willow, pulled up by the roots, the two girls took turns turning the rice over and over, smoking and toasting the grains. As the rice cooked, it gathered the taste of the maple. I can't take this any more, cried Two Strike Girl, throwing down the stick. If I have to work, at least I'm going to have some fun at it. Running over to a bark-lined pit in the ground, she jumped in and began treading rice with a frantic pace that made everyone around her laugh. It was the sight of the impatient Two Strike Girl dancing the rice that Omakias would remember long after, in the deep winter of the year. Her face was flushed and thrilled with effort. She was tireless. All day and the next, Two Strike's legs moved up and down. Her feet, in clean new moccasins, crushed the tough hulls. She never stopped. And all the time her eyes were shining, her white teeth set in a huge grin. Ondig danced up and down with her on a limb above. Come help me, she called to Omakias, jumping to help her cousin. Omakias felt as proud and bold. The two held hands and stepped high, day after day, night after night. Although the family did not return with as much rice as they needed, Omakias and Two Strike Girl became such good friends that ever after they called each other sister. Chapter 7. The move. Day left on his voyage, and the rest of the family worked hard to prepare as much food as possible for the winter. For days, the girls dried and then parched the corn that they had saved for the hungry birds. Around and around they stirred the corn in an iron kettle over a low fire. Nokomis went over to Tallow's place and pounded some of the corn to meal with the hollowed log and great round stick that Tallow kept in her yard. While Nokomis worked on the corn, Tallow gutted fish and dried them on a big scaffold that she set up over a special fire. Over a special fire she would feed day and night with cedar wood to give the fish a special flavor. The coal from the cedar she would keep to mix with pine pitch. Mixed together, the stuff made caulking for the seams of the canoes. At the winter cabin, Day had built a rough lean-to and attached it alongside the northern wall. Inside the long lean-to, he had dug out a deep round hole. Angeline and Mama spent one morning lining the earth of the hole with birch bark. They made a tight bark container, like a big makuk, and lined the container with bunches of dried grass. Then they took more curved pieces of birch bark and set them in the interior. This was their food cache. Within the cache, Mama first placed several packs of dried smoked fish and venison, all tied carefully together in 2 layers of bark. When those packs were set neatly down on the bottom, she told Omakias to fetch the parched corn, which she had stored in neat skin bags. There were several makuks of wild rice from the fall's gathering, though the harvest had been so poor. Mama had used the intestines of the moose to store the pounded meat and dried berries they would have on feast days as a treat. She set those carefully to one side, surrounded by sheaths of bark. Deep, deep in the food cache, unseen to anyone but Omakias, Mama set 8 birchbark cones of maple sugar. These, Omakias knew, were for the hardest times in winter, when they would need sweetness to survive in spirit, as well as food to keep them strong. When all was finished, Nokomis came to bless the cache. In the deep night of the fading afternoon, Grandma raised her arms the way she did at sunrise near the water. Everything grew very quiet around her. Even Pinch stopped shuffling his feet and rubbing his nose. Outside, the birds hushed. The sky bent to listen. The wind died down. Golden leaves hung balanced in the air. It was as though, Omakias thought, all of creation was interested in Nokomis's words. Even her own heart beat quieter, and that excited, jumpy feeling in her calmed. Whenever Grandma prayed, she made the world around her feel protected, safe, eternal. Nokomis bent over and looked very carefully at the cache to make certain that it was properly packed. Anisha, she breathed quietly, standing again, holding in her palm a tiny mound of tobacco. She looked down at the tobacco, touched it lovingly, and asked the spirits for protection against the cold. She spoke to the Creator. "We're very small," she said, "just human. Help us to live this winter through. Come to us, especially during the harshest moon, the crust on the snow moon, when so often meat is scarce, when the ice is too thick to catch many fish, when disease breaks us and the Windigo spirit, the hungry one, comes stalking from house to Anishinaabe house. O daga widukau Anishinabeg, widukau Anishinabeg," she asked. Her voice was soft, but deep and troubled. Stillness swirled around the little cabin when she finished. It was as though everyone's heart were touched a little by the coming cold, as though a shadow of the Windigo swept across their minds. Omakia shivered. Angeline touched her shoulder. Mama stroked Pinch's rough, hay-like stack of hair. Baby Nemo was the first to make a sound, and that sound was a sudden cry. Okay, that's it for today.